Aloha and welcome to our video on the circulatory system. In this video, we'll identify the major parts of the circulatory system and their functions. We'll also describe the parts of the blood and explain what the blood does, and we'll identify some of the causes of cardiovascular disease. Okay, so to begin, here's a picture of the circulatory system, and you can see all of its various components. Primary to it is the heart, and you can see it here in both pictures. What the heart does is the heart is the pump for the blood. It's what moves the blood through, and that's what the circulatory system needs to do. It needs to move this blood, and then the blood functions to take certain things here and there and everywhere. If you notice in this side over here is where we have our arteries. Arteries are generally those vessels that are going to go from the heart out to the body. And then we have the veins over on this side here, which return blood to the heart so it can be pumped out again. Okay, so here we have our heart, and there's a bunch of different things. Let's talk about blood flowing into the heart, and let's go from the body first. So we have this vein here, which is the superior vena cava, and the inferior vena cava down here. The superior vena cava drains the upper body, the inferior drains the lower body, and all of this blood from the body flows into here, the right atrium. From the right atrium, it's going to flow down through a valve into the right ventricle, and the right ventricle is going to pump the blood out. So it's going to pump it out here to these arteries that are going to go to the lungs. And you'll notice that this blood coming in here is coming from the body, so it's going to be high in CO2. It's going to be carrying out the waste products from cellular respiration. So we're going to send this high CO2 blood to the lungs. And in the lungs, that CO2 is going to swap out and be replaced with oxygenated blood. So the oxygen is going to swap the place of the CO2. So now we get blood high in oxygen here, which will flow into the left atrium down here. And from the left atrium, it flows into the left ventricle, which is the biggest, most muscular part of the heart. And it has to be this way because blood here will then get forced out through the aorta, and that's what takes it out to the body. So from the aorta, it branches out to go up to the head and down to the lower parts of the body, and it'll go out to the body where it has this oxygenated blood, which will give the cells the oxygen they need for cellular respiration, and it'll also carry away the waste product of CO2, which then in turn comes back here. So we can see that it's this big system. So let's take a peek here at the system real fast. And here we can see it. And we have two primarily different systems. We have the systemic system, which is here, and then we have the pulmonary system here. The pulmonary system deals with the lungs, and this is how we get our blood to and from the lungs. And you'll notice here that we go out of the right ventricle through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, and in the lungs it swaps over and becomes oxygen rich, and it'll come into the left atrium. And there it enters the systemic system, which goes to the body. And in the systemic system, it flows down into the left ventricle, out through the aorta, and then it'll go to the various parts of the body. Okay, and where it goes to the capillaries, where the cells can get the oxygen from the blood, have cellular respiration occur, and they get rid of their carbon dioxide, and we have this come back, and that's what flows into the right atria, and then the right atria will flow into the right ventricle, and the whole process starts all over again. So the atria are going to be where it receives it, the ventricles where it's going to send it out, systemic system is where it goes to the body, and the pulmonary system is where it goes to the lungs. And what it's going to do is, if we draw it here real quickly, take one blood molecule, we'll start it here in our right ventricle. We notice that that one's going to go to the lungs, come back into the left atria, to the left ventricle, out through the aorta, to the body, back into the right atria, the right ventricle, go back out to the lungs, come back into the left side of the heart, back out, and it'll come back, and you can see this process, this cycle going all over again. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the blood that flows through the system. The liquid part is called plasma, and that just kind of holds the blood cells and allows them to flow through the arteries and veins. When we're talking about the solid part of the blood, we have three different things. We have our red blood cells, which are the erythrocytes, and these are the ones that have the hemoglobin in them, and those are the ones that transport oxygen out to the cells. So very important that way. In our blood, we also have the white blood cells, and the white blood cells fight infection. And they don't necessarily go into the cell, they stay in this interstitial fluid. So when you have two cells that are next to each other, they're not necessarily touching, They kind of stick together, but there's a gap in between. This is the interstitial space or interstitial fluid, and that's where our white blood cells tend to hang out. But they'll travel through the circulatory system to where their infection is that they need to work on. And then finally, we have our platelets. And our platelets are made up of fibrinogen. And basically, what they do is whenever there's an opening in the system, it's the platelets that'll go over there and they start blocking that off. And that's what helps form a blood clot. So that's what'll stop leakage from the circulatory system, are these platelets. And those are our components of the blood and what they basically do. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some heart diseases that are going to happen. What happens is we'll have this plaque build up in the cell wall. So other things in the blood that are going there that don't belong there, sometimes they'll find a little tear and nick or something, they'll start building up and they'll build up. And what we notice is they get to the point that they start to conflict blood flow. So when you stop blood flow like that, then several things will happen. That's when we can have a stroke. That's when we can have a heart attack because the blood's no longer able to flow through there. It'll treat it as an opening, and sometimes we'll form a clot, and that clot can then flow, break free, blood will flow again, but now we have a clot that can get trapped in a smaller blood vessel. And this is what happens with heart attacks. Is a heart attack is where you have that clot go through there and then it starves the heart muscle, and the muscles in the heart then stop contracting, and that's what the heart attack is. If it gets into the brain, then you have a stroke. You basically have cells dying off because they're not getting the oxygen they need from the circulatory system. So that's the big issues that we have here in the heart diseases. Okay, so real quickly in summary, on the circulatory system, we talked about the heart and what it does, and it's basically just a pump that keeps the blood flowing through it. We talked about the blood vessels, which are the passageway through the body that the blood flows, and then we talked about the blood and its components itself. And we talked about what the circulatory's main purpose is, and that's to transport gases and nutrients throughout the body, and it also helps carry away the waste materials. So when we're talking about transporting gases, it's taking oxygen to the cells for cellular respiration and bringing the carbon dioxide back. It also how we get nutrients to various parts of the body. So that's it for our video. As always, good luck on the lessons, and we'll see you in the next video.